as long as the story and the layout, if the layout distracts from the story, that could be a problem. Definitely like seeing a poster that's crisp and clean and comes straight down, you know, top to bottom, left to right. If you start with one panel at the bottom, that's your beginning point, and you wind up going kitty corner and you have no progression that makes any logical sense, or that can distract and take away from your story. You don't need to have a lot of text. In fact, if you have a lot of writing, then a person has to read it. They can read a paper, they can read a manuscript, but a poster's meant for a two-way interaction. And if you have to wait for someone to read, that interaction's lost. So use pictures as much as possible, use bulleted points, don't have long period, long texts. You can see there's an abstract here. Well, that's a requirement of this poster session that this poster was put into, and I don't think it's harmful to have an abstract, but what you want to avoid is having text like this laced throughout the entire poster. Some of you will have to describe some experimental setup. You can write it in words, but that's not going to be effective. Put it in a diagram, with arrows pointing, little flow chart, things like that. That can be very effective. When you have a panel or a segment, you need to have some kind of a title. What you want is a title that reads like a headline. What kind of background should you have on a poster? I'm going to just use this poster as one of these kind of examples that has a background. And actually what's interesting about it is the background does kind of help tell the story. It turns out, whether or not you care, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's some kind of a micrograph, some kind of maybe a atomic force microscope sort of picture of the item that they're studying. For me, and this is my sensitivity, I'll say, it seems a little busy. It steals away a little bit from the actual story itself. And it's kind of a fine line that you want to walk between using an attention-getting background, but one that doesn't upstage your actual story. And that's something to keep in mind. So what kind of background should you have? Should it be a photograph? Well, sometimes that works. You just got to be sensitive to it. When you look at it, do you first look at the background, or do you look at the actual story? So the point, though, is if you overemphasize your background, you run the possibility of upstaging the actual work. So take a look at this poster. It's very complicated. It has all kinds of schemes. Does this make the fact that there's all these schemes, does this make this poster a bad example? I would say no, because here's why. Sometimes in order to tell a story, to do the research that you're doing, it's a complicated topic to begin with. We all face this kind of problem. So how do you talk and how do you lay out a poster that has a lot of complexity? Well, the key is you have to make it digestible for your audience. You have to know what to do to to break it down into pieces, help them flow through the poster in the right direction, and help them get the points that you want them to get. So one thing they did to help sort of make this more digestible, this very complex set of data and material, is they numbered the different panels to help guide the person through the story they want to tell. And so I guess you have to assume that you follow it in numerical order. That makes sense. So that's one thing they did. Another thing they did very nice here is going back to that idea of titles should read as headlines. All of their titles read like a headline. These headlines help the audience. It helps you as the presenter remember what it is you're really trying to talk about. Down here in a very small area is references. Some people have to include references. They're taking a figure from another document, or maybe or another paper, and they have to provide a reference for where that came from, or they're stating some kind of a fact or some kind of a point. Maybe they're doing a direct quote, depending on what it is you're doing your research on. You have to provide a reference. So how do you do that? Well, one way I've seen is people put little superscripts and then at the end have a references section. I tell you what, I don't like that way. It distracts me because I'm like, what's that one for? Oh, I'm way up here and I gotta go way down here to find the reference. I actually like the way that it's done here. You will see references directly cited, and in a small way, not so much that it gets in the way of the figure, but it's there, you can read it, you can see it, and it's cited at the point where it has relevance. That is important, I think. For a poster, that's how I recommend doing it. Now, your mentor or the people that you work with might believe otherwise, and that's okay. I'm just giving you my take on this. But I like this poster for that. Another part of this poster I like. Now, acknowledgments. I actually encourage you to put acknowledgments because a lot of times you have funding, someone paid for this research. It's really important that you give credit to those funding agencies, and it's important to the funding agencies too. And so that's something that you may not appreciate, but you should be aware of it. Talk to your mentor and find out, where did this money come from? Okay, that's important. The other part is, obviously, you have collaborators and other people who may have been important in the work. So give credit where credit is due. That's important. It's part of the collegial nature of doing research. A lot of times it's interdisciplinary, involves many people. Another thing to keep in mind is, I don't know how well you can see, which one do you see? Do you see this? Okay. Sometimes, because of where you're giving your poster, you have to have some banners and some logos on your poster. Where do you put these logos? And do you want them to be so obvious that they kind of look like a NASCAR car? and so it can be that way. Make them small, first of all, I think, unless there's some kind of rule that tells you otherwise. So you do the best you can to make them somewhat obscured so they don't get in the way. You might want to, like these, you got a black background, yet these things are white. They stand out. Poster, I think, does a really good job of telling a very complicated story.